On Saturday, November 22nd, the Southern District of New York made a rare and unexpected move. The courthouse, typically closed on weekends, opened its doors for an emergency session. There was no scheduled trial, no jury, and no press conference. But there was one name powerful enough, controversial enough, and explosive enough to bring everyone into the courthouse on a Saturday morning: Sean "Diddy" Combs. By 7:00 a.m., the marble steps outside the SDNY building were lined with reporters, camera crews, and the sounds of sirens echoing through the crisp, cold air. The tension was thick, palpable even from a distance. Inside, the mood was far more intense. Everyone knew why they were here. It was all about the alcohol bottle found in Diddy's prison cell at Fort Dix on November 7th. One bottle, one violation. And that one moment could possibly tighten his life sentence even further. Inside the courthouse, the halls were eerie in their quietness, almost abandoned. But Courtroom 26A was packed. U.S. Marshals stood watch at the doors, and prosecutors whispered amongst themselves. Journalists hovered over their notepads, waiting for the action to unfold. Though there had been no official announcement yet, it was clear to everyone in that room that this was not just any routine hearing. This was something far more significant. It was a reckoning, and it was coming for Diddy. When the doors to the courtroom opened, all eyes turned toward the man entering the room. Diddy, dressed in his orange jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed, and his jaw clenched in a tight grimace. He entered with slow, deliberate steps, as though the weight of his entire past was resting on his shoulders. His eyes remained fixed on the floor, avoiding the cameras and the whispers, his gaze never lifting higher than the ground. He moved as though trying to disappear, trying to avoid the stares and judgment that awaited him. This hearing, which could have easily been swept under the rug, was the result of a single discovery that had shaken the very foundation of the case against Diddy. A glass bottle filled with homemade alcohol, known as Pruno, found hidden beneath his bunk at Fort Dix. The bottle smelled strong, fresh, and when it was discovered, the news spread quickly through the prison. The guards had found it, sealed it, and escalated the situation up the chain of command. Tests confirmed that the liquid inside was Pruno, illegal alcohol made by inmates in prison. That discovery, that single moment, changed everything. Diddy had previously promised to stay sober and committed to rehabilitation in front of Judge Arun Subramanian during his sentencing on October 3rd. Now, just weeks later, the discovery of the alcohol shattered that promise. The judge had given him a second chance, and this violation was seen as a slap in the face to the court's leniency. For the court, this wasn't just about a bottle of alcohol, it was about a deeper issue: betrayal. Diddy had failed to live up to the expectations set by the court, and now he would have to answer for it. The judge, Arun Subramanian, was the same one who had handed down Diddy's original sentencing. When he saw the violation report and reviewed the evidence, he didn't wait for Monday or the usual routine. He ordered the emergency session to take place on Saturday. The urgency of the situation was clear. This wasn't just about alcohol, it was about trust, discipline, and a man's willingness, or lack thereof, to change. As the session began, Diddy remained silent, his face stoic, betraying nothing of what he was feeling inside. His lawyer, Mark Agnafilo, leaned in to whisper in his ear, probably trying to calm him, but nothing could erase the weight of the moment. The courtroom was silent as the prosecution began to read the charges aloud. It was clear this wasn't just about the alcohol bottle. It was about everything that led to it and everything that would follow. The prosecutor began reading from the evidence folder, the details of the incident that led to this emergency hearing. The date was November 7th, 2025, at approximately 6:42 p.m., when correctional officers conducting a routine inspection discovered the sealed bottle hidden beneath Diddy's bunk. The bottle was tested, and the results confirmed that the liquid inside was Pruno, a homemade alcohol that was illegal in federal prison. The prosecutor raised the bottle, sealed and tagged, placing it on the evidence stand just feet away from Judge Subramanian. The bottle, now the focal point of the courtroom, had the power to determine the fate of one of the most powerful figures in music. As the prosecutor continued, the tension in the room grew. He explained that the violation was categorized under the highest level of prohibited acts within the Bureau of Prisons, Code 111. This was no small offense. The prosecutor went on to explain that this violation could lead to loss of privileges, segregation, and in cases of repeated violations, judicial consequences. The words "judicial consequences" hung in the air, making it clear that the stakes had just gotten much higher. Diddy's lawyer, Agnafilo, tried to respond, defending his client. He argued that Diddy had not admitted to producing the alcohol or consuming it, and that there was no definitive evidence to prove that Diddy had done either. But the prosecutor was quick to counter. The bottle had been hidden beneath Diddy's personal bunk, wrapped and concealed. It was not placed there accidentally. The prosecution argued that the evidence pointed to deliberate action, not just a mistake. The court's focus then shifted to the other evidence that had surfaced. Internal disciplinary records from Fort Dix were presented, showing that Diddy had been acting nervous and hesitant when asked to step aside during the inspection. He had insisted that the bottle was not his and that he had no idea how it got there, but no other inmate claimed ownership of the bottle. The prosecution also presented surveillance logs showing that no other inmates had entered Diddy's cell for at least 3 hours before the search took place. This, they argued, showed that the alcohol had been in Diddy's possession for a significant period of time before it was discovered. As the prosecutor continued, more damning evidence came to light. The prison's monitoring system had picked up on unusual smells coming from Diddy's cell, along with irregular gatherings near his bunk and late-night movements during quiet hours. These logs painted a picture of someone who was deliberately hiding something, someone who was involved in a pattern of behavior that extended beyond a simple violation. The prosecutor argued that this wasn't a one-time mistake. It was part of a broader pattern of misconduct. At this point, the tension in the courtroom had reached its peak. Diddy sat in silence, his fingers twitching nervously. His lawyer tried to regain control, but the judge cut him off, making it clear that the evidence being presented was far more serious than anything they had prepared for. The judge's gaze never wavered as he continued to assess the situation, his eyes fixed on Diddy as if he were already weighing the consequences of his actions. Then the prosecutor dropped the final bombshell. A recorded conversation between 2 inmates had surfaced, mentioning Diddy and his alcohol. The conversation had taken place 30 minutes before the officers entered Diddy's cell. The defense tried to argue that the conversation was just gossip, but the prosecutor fired back, pointing out that the timestamp matched the timing of the discovery. This was the final piece of the puzzle, and it sealed the fate of Diddy's defense. The judge, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, declaring that the evidence presented painted a picture of deliberate misconduct. As the hearing continued, the picture of Diddy's behavior grew clearer. This was no longer just about a bottle of alcohol. It was about a pattern of defiance, a deliberate disregard for the rules, and a willingness to push boundaries even when he had been given a second chance. The judge's tone became more and more stern as he reviewed the evidence, making it clear that Diddy's actions were no accident. He had been given a chance to prove himself, and instead, he had violated the trust placed in him by the court. Finally, after hours of testimony and evidence, the moment of truth arrived. Judge Subramanian addressed Diddy directly. The words he spoke were final, firm, and devastating. The court had reviewed every detail, and it was clear that Diddy's actions were not a simple mistake. They were part of a deliberate pattern of behavior that undermined the very principles of rehabilitation. The judge had no choice but to extend Diddy's sentence by 30 years, with no eligibility for appeal. The room exploded in shock. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their pens flying across their notebooks. But Diddy didn't move. He sat there, staring blankly ahead, his expression hollow. He had lost everything. His legacy, his freedom, and his future were now in the hands of the court. His world, once filled with fame and fortune, had crumbled in an instant. As the courtroom was adjourned, Diddy was led away in handcuffs, his head lowered, his future sealed. The judge's words echoed in the room. "This court cannot allow your sentence to remain as originally ordered." Outside, the world was already reacting, but inside the courthouse, the silence was deafening. Diddy had been given a final chance to prove himself, and he had failed. His story, once filled with success, now seemed destined for a tragic ending.